Hey, Mike here. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Dark Poutine early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime.
Oh my gosh. Welcome back to Dark Poutine. It's actually the new year now, so Matthew and I are here.
We are here.
It's 2026. We're recording on January 3rd, 2026.
And Mike, you had a 3-day delay returning from Newfoundland.
I wasn't in Newfoundland, and yes, it was a 3-day delay, and let's talk about that toward the end of the show.
Okay.
I don't really want to get into it now.
Mike is still recovering from it.
I am still recovering. I am rather grumpy with the weather. And the Canadian Airlines saying, oh, it was all weather, and it was not all weather related what was going on. So anyway, we'll get into that later on in the show.
Here we are talking about Vancouver.
And I learned that planes have a bumhole. Well, I was away. Anyway.
You're going to have to explain that later.
Yeah. I made a reel on Instagram and Facebook and got 25,000 views. So.
Did you really?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Oh, well. Let's forge forth with this one, which is a little more serious than what we're talking about now. So
usually is.
Yeah.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during the Dark Poutine podcast are solely those of the producer and do not necessarily represent those of Curious Cast, its affiliate, Global News, nor their parent company, Chorus Entertainment.
Dark Poutine is not for the faint of heart or squeamish. Listener discretion is strongly advised. We're not experts on the topics we present, nor are we journalists. We're two ordinary Canadian schmucks chatting about crime and the dark side of history. Let's get to it. Put on your toque, grab yourself a double-double and a Nanaimo bar. It's time to scarf down some Dark Poutine.
You are responsible for obtaining and maintaining at your own cost all equipment needed to listen to Dark Poutine. Dark Poutine can be addictive. Side effects may include, but not be limited to, pausing and questioning the system, elevated heart rate, pondering humanity, odd looks from colleagues as you laugh out loud at work, family members not into true crime worrying about you. Positive side effects may include some perspectives and opinions that you disagree with, as well as some wokeness and empathy. If you don't think Dark Poutine is for you, consult your doctor immediately.
At the start of the 20th century, Vancouver, BC was a fast-growing Pacific port. Most residents were white settlers of British or European descent, but Chinese and Japanese communities were already well-established and growing. They lived, worked, and built businesses in neighborhoods like Chinatown and Powell Street, playing a central role in the city's economy while being denied political rights and social acceptance. By 1907, economic anxiety and racial resentment had hardened into open hostility. Asian workers were blamed for falling wages and job insecurity, a message repeated by newspapers, politicians, and organized exclusionary groups. The riots that followed on September 7th were not sudden outbursts, but the result of years of public rhetoric that treated entire communities as threats. This episode examines how those ideas turned into violence on Vancouver's streets. You're listening to Dark Poutine episode 401, Vancouver's 1907 Anti-Asian Riots. At the beginning of the 20th century, Vancouver was growing faster than its institutions could keep pace. Incorporated in 1886, it had expanded rapidly into a Pacific gateway defined by rail, shipping, logging, and fishing. By 1907, its population was roughly 50,000. The city sold itself as a place of opportunity, but that promise was unevenly distributed. Employment was unstable, wages fluctuated, and economic downturns were frequent. For many white working-class residents, insecurity became a permanent condition rather than a passing phase. Chinese and Japanese immigrants were already long-standing parts of the city by this point. Chinese laborers had been brought to Canada in large numbers during the construction of the Canadian Pacific Railway. After the railway was completed, many remained in British Columbia, finding work where they could. They opened laundries, ran restaurants, and operated small businesses that served the broader population. Japanese immigrants, many with maritime backgrounds, worked in fishing, logging, and milling. By 1907, Japanese fishermen formed a substantial portion of the coastal fishing workforce. These were not temporary presences. Families were established, children were born, and neighborhoods took root.
And this didn't come out of nowhere, Mike.
Right.
The 1907 riots weren't some sudden explosion of hatred, right? It was about drawing lines. It was about deciding in a very physical way who the country was for, right? And right. Kind of Britishness, in a way, back then was sort of the organizing idea, empire, right?
Well, whiteness.
Yeah. Well, equals,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And racism was how it got enforced.
Mm-hmm.
And, these Chinese and Japanese people, like you said, they were not visitors. They were settlers, just like the rest of the white folks.
They were here helping to build the country.
They were literally settlers at the same time, came over at the same time as everyone else.
Right. They were just the minority.
Yep.
Anyway. Despite many having been in the country even longer than their European counterparts in some instances, Asian residents were rarely described as neighbors. In public discourse, they were framed as economic tools at best and threats at worst. Government policy reinforced this framing. Chinese immigrants were subject to a federal head tax that rose steadily, reaching $500 in 1903. The amount was punitive, intended to deter migration rather than regulate it. Voting rights were denied to Chinese and Japanese residents, excluding them from civic participation. These legal barriers sent a clear message about who the city was for and who was expected to remain on the margins. Newspapers reinforced and normalized these attitudes daily. Vancouver's major papers regularly printed editorials and reports that treated Asian immigration as a crisis. Coverage in the Vancouver Daily Province reflected similar assumptions. In the months leading up to September 1907, the paper repeatedly warned about what it described as unchecked Asian immigration. One article claimed that white workers were being, quote, driven from employment by the influx of Oriental labor, willing to live under conditions no white man should be asked to endure, end quote. The presence of Asian workers was framed as a moral and economic threat rather than the conditions imposed by employers. Asian workers were paid less because they were excluded from unions and denied bargaining power. They lived in crowded conditions because housing discrimination left them few alternatives. Rather than fairly questioning these systems, newspapers often treated the resulting inequalities as evidence of racial difference. The effect was to normalize resentment and redirect anger away from those with economic power, often those who owned those very newspapers. Organized labor in Vancouver was divided. Some union leaders argued that solidarity across racial lines was the only way to counter employer exploitation. Others took the opposite view, insisting that exclusion was necessary to protect white workers. The exclusionist position gained traction, particularly during periods of high unemployment. Asian workers were barred from many unions, which then cited their non-membership as proof that they were unwilling to integrate into Canadian labor culture. It was a circular logic that justified continued exclusion. Out of this environment emerged the Asiatic Exclusion League, formed in Vancouver in August of 1907. The League was explicitly modeled on similar organizations in California. Its leadership included labor activists, small business owners, and public figures. The League presented itself as a defender of white labor and national identity. Its rhetoric blended economic fear with racial hierarchy, portraying Asian immigrants as both unfair competitors and permanent outsiders. The League organized public meetings that drew large crowds. Newspapers treated these gatherings as legitimate civic events. One province headline announced plans for a mass rally promising that, quote, working men of every trade will unite in protest against the Asiatic invasion, end quote. International events at the time intensified these fears. Japan's victory in the Russo-Japanese War in 1905 had elevated its status as a global power. Japanese immigrants were no longer viewed as solely poor laborers. They were increasingly described as agents of a rising empire. The Daily World warned readers that Japanese immigration posed, quote, a question not only of labor, but of national safety, end quote. No evidence was offered to support this claim, but repetition gave it weight.
Yes, and this is where fear starts to scale up, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. It's no longer just about wages or jobs. You know, once Japan is framed as empire, Canada starts acting with its own imperial frame.
Right.
And, loyalty, threat, national safety, those are the words of empire. And once you start thinking that way, people stop being workers and start being treated like threats. That they never actually were, right? And which is remarkable. It's a remarkable amount of geopolitics project onto someone who's just trying to make a living. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Chinese residents, lacking a powerful state willing to intervene on their behalf, were portrayed even more harshly. Editorials frequently described Chinatown as unsanitary and morally suspect. These descriptions ignored the fact that municipal neglect contributed to overcrowding and poor infrastructure. Blame was placed on residents rather than on the city's failure to provide services. Selective reporting by local papers again bolstered the narrative of these residents as a threat to white British Columbians. The physical geography of Vancouver mirrored these divisions. Chinatown along Pender Street and Japantown around Powell Street were economically integrated into the city, yet socially segregated. They were close enough to be visible and useful, but distant enough to be othered. Newspapers often described these neighborhoods as separate worlds within the city, reinforcing the idea that they did not truly belong to Vancouver. The otherness of it.
Yeah. And we talked about this in an earlier episode in Toronto as well. Mm-hmm. That geography wasn't neutral, and it didn't just mirror division, it enforced it. These people are close enough to work, but far enough to exclude. And that's boundary setting quietly on maps. And it's amazing how often segregation shows up as zoning bylaws.
Reserves. Indigenous reserves are the same thing.
Yeah.
In August 1907, Vancouver newspapers carried advertisements promoting the Asiatic Exclusion League's agenda. One such notice, published in the Vancouver Daily Province, stated the League's purpose in clear racial terms. Quote, the object of this organization is to work for the exclusion from the Dominion of Canada, its territory and its possessions, all Asiatics. End quote. This notice listed prominent local supporters. Events south of the border also influenced local sentiment. In September 1907, newspapers reported on anti-Asian violence in Bellingham, Washington, where white mobs targeted South Asian mill workers, forcibly expelling them from the city. Canadian papers covered these events with a mixture of alarm and approval. One report noted that Bellingham had, quote, solved its Asiatic problem by decisive action, end quote. The implication was difficult to miss. By late summer, the tone of reporting had sharpened. The Asiatic Exclusion League announced plans for a large parade and rally at Vancouver City Hall on September 7, 1907. The stated purpose was to petition the federal government for stricter immigration controls. Coverage in the province described the event as a demonstration of, quote, the determination of white British Columbia to protect itself, end quote. Police presence was mentioned only in passing, with no indication that authorities expected trouble. There was little attempt to disguise racial motivation. Asian residents were described as incapable of assimilation regardless of how long they had lived in Canada. Economic arguments were racialized, and racial arguments were presented as common sense. By the time the rally was set to begin, the distance between protest and violence had narrowed. Public discourse had framed Asian communities as problems to be solved. Legal structures had denied them protection and voice. Organized groups had provided a sense of purpose and legitimacy to exclusion. When people gathered at City Hall that evening, they did so in a city that had already decided in print and policy who mattered and who did not. The riot that followed was not an accident of crowd behavior. It was the result of a long campaign of fear-based rhetoric, economic anxiety redirected into racial hostility, and a public conversation that treated violence as reasonable response to perceived threat. Before a single window was broken, the conditions that made that violence possible were firmly in place.
And this is the part that's easy to miss if we treat this like a riot story instead of a nation-building story. Mm-hmm. What's happening here isn't just that people lost control. It's that the country was practicing saying who it was for. Mm-hmm. So the violence became a way of clarifying the boundary, right? When the words and the laws had already pointed that direction. Right. And again, I can't keep coming back to this idea of empire and Britishness and Canada's role in empire setting the standard. And, and it was all back then, it was all sort of circled within racism, right? And once the work is done in advance, the crowd doesn't have to invent anything. It just has to act out. It's not chaos. This was like rehearsal paying off, if you know what I mean. Right. It's like it's the natural next step of the policies and the rhetoric that were being spouted at the time.
Yep. On the evening of September 7th, 1907, thousands of people gathered in the streets around Vancouver City Hall. The rally, organized by the Asiatic Exclusion League, had been promoted in local newspapers and publicly advertised for weeks. The Vancouver Daily Province described the gathering in anticipatory terms, telling readers that, quote, working men of every trade, end quote, were expected to attend and that the event would represent, quote, a united protest against Asiatic immigration, end quote. The turnout was as expected. By early evening, estimates placed the crowd at several thousand. Many were union members. Others were simply residents drawn by the spectacle and the rhetoric that had filled the papers throughout the summer. Speakers addressed the crowd from City Hall, repeating familiar themes. Asian immigration was described as a threat to wages, employment, and the future of what speakers called a white British Columbia. These claims were met with cheers. According to a report in the Vancouver Daily World, the mood at the rally was, quote, heated but orderly, end quote, during the speeches. Multiple sources note that the rally featured shouted slogans. The most consistently documented chant was, quote, White Canada forever, end quote. Police were present, but in limited numbers. There's no indication in contemporary reporting that authorities anticipated violence. The gathering was treated as a political event rather than a potential flashpoint. That assumption would soon prove costly. As the speeches concluded, the crowd did not disperse. Instead, it began to move. What happened next unfolded quickly, but not without warning. Groups peeled away from City Hall and headed east toward Chinatown. The transition from rally to march was informal but purposeful. Witnesses later described a sense of momentum, as if the evening had been building toward something more than speeches all along. Chinatown, centered along Pender Street, was one of the first targets. The neighborhood was densely packed with businesses and residences. Many shopkeepers were still open when the crowd arrived. According to the Daily Province, rioters began by smashing windows, overturning carts, and looting goods from storefronts. Plate glass windows were shattered up and down the street. Doors were kicked in. Merchandise was dragged outside and destroyed or stolen. The Vancouver Daily World reported that Chinese residents fled their homes as the crowd advanced, noting that, quote, men, women, and children were seen running from the path of the mob, end quote. The paper described scenes of panic and confusion as residents sought safety wherever they could. There was little in the way of organized defense. Chinese residents had long been excluded from meaningful legal protection and had few expectations that authorities would intervene on their behalf. Police response in Chinatown was slow and ineffective. Officers were vastly outnumbered, and contemporary accounts suggest they focused on containing the crowd rather than stopping the destruction outright. Arrests were minimal compared to the scale of the violence. The priority appeared to be restoring order rather than protecting property or people. After moving through Chinatown, portions of the crowd turned north and east toward Powell Street, the heart of Vancouver's Japanese community. This was a critical turning point in the evening. Japantown was also home to shops and residences, but the response there would be markedly different. Unlike Chinatown, the Japanese residents organized quickly. Many had seen the crowd approaching and prepared to defend themselves. According to later reporting summarized in local papers, residents armed themselves with clubs, sticks, and whatever tools were at hand. When rioters attempted to enter the neighborhood, they were met with resistance. The Daily Province acknowledged this resistance in its reporting, noting that the crowd was, quote, met with determined opposition and driven back, end quote. Several rioters were injured in the clashes. The paper's tone shifted noticeably at this point, emphasizing the unexpected pushback rather than celebrating the mob's actions. This resistance prevented the same level of destruction seen in Chinatown. The difference in outcomes between the two neighborhoods was stark. Chinatown suffered extensive damage. Japantown, though attacked, remained largely intact. The reasons were practical rather than symbolic. Preparedness, numbers, and a willingness to defend property and families made the difference. The violence was not inevitable in every location. It depended on circumstances.
Yeah, and it's tempting to compare outcomes and start talking about who resisted and who didn't, as if these were tests of character, because it wasn't. What we're really seeing here is the difference between a community that had some capacity to protect itself and a community that had been left completely exposed for years. Mm-hmm. And this is where history often lets itself off the hook. We like to call what follows resilience, right? Because it sounds admirable and neutral. Right. But resilience is just what we name survival after protection has been completely withheld.
Mm-hmm. As the night wore on, the crowd began to disperse. Fires did not break out, luckily, and there were no reported deaths, but injuries and property damage were significant. The streets of Chinatown were left strewn with broken glass and debris. Businesses faced costly repairs. Livelihoods were disrupted overnight. The following morning, Vancouver awoke to images and accounts of the destruction. Newspapers documented the damage in detail, though the framing varied. Some reports emphasized the disorder and lawlessness. Others framed the riot as an unfortunate but understandable reaction to public frustration. The Vancouver Daily World described the events as, quote, a regrettable outbreak following an otherwise peaceful demonstration, end quote. Asian residents were often referred to collectively without individual names or stories, reinforcing their portrayal as a faceless group rather than individual victims.
Right, and this is how violence gets, domesticated in a way, right? You shrink it down.
Normalized.
You smooth the language. You turn targeted attacks into, quote, outbreaks, mm-hmm. and collective decisions into these unfortunate side effects. And once you do that, nobody has to ask who was harmed or why. The story becomes about the disruption that happened and not the damage. And notice something else, Mike, that gets erased in this process. The speeches disappear. The rhetoric vanishes. So what was said loudly and publicly gets treated as irrelevant to what followed, as if the words were the point. And it was, the paper here is presenting it as civic disturbance, not a moral crisis. And right. It was a moral crisis. And, the words spoken just before the riot, apparently, were just something that happened earlier and nothing to do with the riot, which is just so ridiculous.
Yep. In contrast, when reporting on Japantown alone, newspapers were more cautious. The fact that Japanese residents had successfully defended themselves introduced an international dimension. Japan, unlike China at the time, was a recognized global power. Editorial tone shifted accordingly. Violence against Japanese residents was treated as diplomatically sensitive, while violence against Chinese residents remained discussed mainly as a domestic matter. Police statements issued in the aftermath focused on crowd control rather than accountability. Officials emphasized the difficulty of managing such a large gathering and praised officers for preventing further escalation. There was little public acknowledgement of failure to protect targeted communities. The underlying assumptions that had fueled the riot were not addressed. The rally and subsequent violence also exposed the extent to which exclusionary ideas had been normalized. The fact that thousands gathered for a rally calling for the exclusion of entire populations and that many had then participated or tolerated violence was not treated as extraordinary by much of the press. It was presented as a civic disturbance, not a moral crisis. For Chinese and Japanese residents, the message was unmistakable. Their safety was conditional. Their rights were limited. Their presence could be challenged violently, and the authorities' response would be muted. For white Vancouverites who supported exclusion, the riot reinforced a sense of collective power. In the days that followed, attention shifted away from the streets and toward consequences. Damage assessments were conducted. Diplomatic cables were sent. Questions were raised about compensation and responsibility. But even as the physical debris was cleared, the more profound implications of the riot remained unsolved. The events of September 7, 1907 marked a turning point. They exposed the fragility of public order when racial hostility is allowed to fester. They also set the stage for what came next. Not reform or reconciliation, but political calculation. How the state responded, who was compensated, and whose suffering was acknowledged would reveal the country's priorities more clearly than any speech delivered that night. When we return, we'll look at the aftermath, how governments reacted, why international pressure mattered more than local justice, and how the riot became a justification for more exclusion rather than a reckoning with racism. We'll be right back. And we are back at the halfway point. Oh, Matthew, you've written a bit here because you feel strongly about some things, I would assume.
You always say that when I have a point of view.
Well, no, it's good. I that's why I want you to do this show with me, because you do have a point of view.
But you'll also notice there are specific shows that we do that I get riled up. And
well, and I drop these into our feed because I know it's going to rile you up. I know you're passionate about it.
When it comes to racism, it's one of the things that riles me up the most. And, I think we have to pause here and think about racism more broadly, because it sits at the center of how I understand this riot.
Yep.
I grew up absorbing some racist ideas too. And I think most white kids our age probably did.
Me too. Mm-hmm.
Right? And not necessarily extreme, but wrong. Sort of, let's call it racism light, right?
Well, so, it's how and what we were taught.
So most racism isn't born fully formed, right? It's ambient. It we learned it through jokes and assumptions and defaults,
right.
and kids pick up that stuff the way they pick up accents, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the difference is what happens next. A lot of people never interrogate this within themselves. They let it harden. It becomes invisible to them because it's shared. And adulthood, for many people, it's not about reflection when it should be. It's about defense. They keep defending identity and certainty and status. And racism survives there because it simplifies the world and flatters their ego. Right?
Yeah, like this is exactly the way I feel about it. And I know earlier on in my journey, I had a few of my own ideas challenged about this line of thought.
Yeah,
and I was adamant that this was not this who was coming at me. They were wrong about it because it hurt and it stung and it made me angry and it made me upset.
And then the scales fell from your eyes.
Well, sort of, yeah. I mean, I had some people challenge me on it and have really good conversations with me, and I was like, oh boy.
Yeah.
There are some ideas that aren't serving humanity here.
Yeah.
That I have, that I carry. And it's no fault of my own because I was taught that.
It's no fault of your own until a point, and that's my next point here. Adult racism doesn't compute for me.
Right.
By the time you're a full-ass grown adult, right, it's not ignorance. You've lived enough. You've shared space and work and life with other people. It gets to the point. If it gets to the point, if you're still holding on to them, racism is a refusal. It's a choice not to know. And it's the cheapest form of collectivism there is. It's feeling better about yourself because you belong to a group instead of standing on who you actually are and what you've actually done with your life. Right?
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. But I think it takes some people, like some people are further along the journey than others, or, wherever we are, we're all headed in the same direction. I really believe that. But some of us, it takes us longer. Some people may never have that realization. And I'm not saying it's okay, but they may never be able to get over that hump for various and sundry reasons.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying it doesn't compute for me because that just shows a person that has no reflection on themselves. Right? Because if you reflect and if you really look into your heart, then you come up with it, and people just don't do that.
Again, I don't disagree. But self-reflection is something you have to choose to do. and people who feel threatened aren't going to choose to do it.
It's actually really sad. I find racists really sad. I feel like they're losing so much of life and so much opportunity for meeting great people.
I have some very close friends from other cultures that I think are wonderful people. Had I maintained the ideas that I was brought up with, as you say, ambiently or casually, I may not have had those friendships and quality relationships that I have today.
Yeah. And bringing this back to 1907, right? Think about it. This would probably amplify it in many ways because Canada itself was still trying to decide who it was, right? And this wasn't a settled country having a bad moment. It was an anxious one. It was a new country in a lot of ways. This was on the outskirts of the country, way on the far Pacific side, right?
Right.
And
it's
so
still pioneering days here. Yeah.
Right. And so when a society feels unsure of itself, racism becomes a shortcut. You add economic fear and loud public rhetoric and institutions willing to look the other way. And that thinking doesn't stay private anymore. It gets validated. It gets acted on. And this is how the riots happened.
Yeah. To recap, when morning came to Vancouver on September 8, 1907, the physical evidence of the previous night was impossible to ignore. Chinatown bore the brunt of the violence. Windows were smashed, storefronts gutted, and goods lay broken in the streets. For many Chinese business owners, years of savings were wiped out in a few hours. Japantown, by contrast, stood largely intact, though shaken. The difference would matter significantly in the days that followed. As we mentioned, no one was killed in the riots, and while there were injuries on both sides, they were reported as non-fatal. That fact was later used to soften the language around what had happened, even as entire livelihoods in Chinatown were destroyed and fear settled in for years afterward. Newspapers moved quickly to frame what had happened. The Vancouver Daily World described the riot as, quote, an outbreak following a mass meeting which had passed off peacefully, end quote, again minimizing the violence and destruction that had occurred. Other coverage also leaned even further toward minimization. The Vancouver Daily Province referred to the events as disorder and street disturbances, language that softened the reality of targeted racial violence. Chinese residents were rarely named. Damage was quantified in dollars rather than lives disrupted. Reports from the police echoed this. Statements released in the aftermath praised officers for preventing greater destruction and emphasized how outnumbered they had been. Arrests were few relative to the size of the crowd. There was no serious effort to pursue organizers or speakers whose rhetoric had fueled the night's events. Responsibility dissolved into generalities. Behind these public statements, another concern was already shaping the response: international embarrassment. News of the attacks on Japanese residents traveled quickly. The Japanese consul in Vancouver lodged a formal protest demanding protection for Japanese subjects and compensation for damaged property. Ottawa took notice. The Canadian federal government moved quickly, not to investigate the riot itself, but to contain its diplomatic fallout. Internal correspondence, later summarized in press reporting, shows that officials were deeply concerned about relations with Japan. Trade, migration agreements, and imperial reputation were all at stake. Violence against Japanese residents was not treated as a domestic civil rights issue, but as a foreign policy problem. In the days that followed the riot, the federal government appointed a commissioner to assess the damage done to Japanese residents. That commissioner was William Lyon Mackenzie King, then Deputy Minister of Labor. His task was narrow and practical, to document losses and determine compensation. In the process, King recorded sworn statements from those who had been attacked, preserving some of the clearest first-hand accounts of what happened that night. One of the people waiting for the crowd that evening was T. Morimoto, a shopkeeper on Powell Street. Days later, he gave a sworn statement describing what he saw. From the W.L. Mackenzie King Report on the Losses Sustained by the Japanese Population of Vancouver, B.C. in September 1907, quote, "On the night of September 7th, I was in my store on Powell Street when word came that a mob was coming from Chinatown. I closed the shutters as best I could, but there were many people shouting and running. They struck at the doors and windows, and I feared the place would be destroyed as had happened in Chinatown." Describing the community's resistance and the aftermath, Morimoto said, quote, "Many of our people gathered together to protect their property and families. We used sticks and such things as we could find. After some time, the crowd was driven away. The windows were broken and goods damaged, but the store was not destroyed. We remained all night, fearing they would return." End quote. After reviewing 107 claims and hearing testimony from 80 witnesses, W.L. King's commission into the damage of Japanese property concluded that the riot caused both property damage and significant business disruption, though many initial claims were reduced as excessive or unsupported. Total compensation losses were assessed at $9,036, with additional allowances recommended for legal costs and claim preparation, all of which were approved and paid by the federal government. The report emphasizes that the attack was unjustified, expresses broad civic regret, and frames compensation as a necessary act of public responsibility rather than an admission of legal liability. The findings of the 1908 Royal Commission led by W.L. Mackenzie King into the damages suffered by Vancouver's Chinese community were markedly different. After examining 227 claims and hearing extensive testimony, the Commission concluded that the riots caused significant property damage and business losses, primarily from smashed storefronts and forced business closures, with total losses assessed at $25,990. King recommended full compensation from public funds plus an additional $1,000 for legal expenses, a recommendation approved by the federal government. The report also drew attention to Chinese responsibility for the large unregulated opium manufacturing industry in British Columbia, urging Parliament to address it as a matter of national concern. Again, in contrast to their Japanese counterparts, Chinese business owners faced significant barriers to seeking redress. Many lacked citizenship status. Legal avenues were limited. There was no powerful foreign government advocating on their behalf. Claims were slow, incomplete, or denied altogether. Where compensation was discussed, it was often treated as discretionary or charitable rather than required. These disparities were noted, if at all, quietly in the press. One Daily World item acknowledged that, quote, Chinese claims present difficulties owing to the status of claimants, end quote. The message was clear. Protection and compensation depended not on harm suffered, but on political leverage.
Yeah, and this is one of those moments where the state shows its priorities without having to explain itself. Mm-hmm. Governments don't respond to harm evenly. They respond to risk, right?
Who's going to kick up the biggest stink, yeah.
Who might embarrass them, who might retaliate, who can't. And once you see that, the pattern here becomes clear. Mm-hmm. The riot exposed violence on the street, but the response exposes how power actually works, which 100%. Is fascinating.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting to watch this kind of thing. And we still see it. A lot of inquiries happen years after most of the people who would have any compensation coming to them are dead.
I know.
It's very interesting that, we'll wait until, it's going to cost us the least amount.
Of course.
Yeah. In the months that followed the riot, Ottawa responded not by confronting racism, but by managing its consequences. Japanese immigration was limited through the Gentleman's Agreement, a diplomatic compromise that reduced arrivals while preserving relations with Japan. Chinese immigration, already burdened by the head tax, was increasingly portrayed as a threat to public order. That logic would harden over time, culminating in the 1923 Chinese Immigration Act, which effectively barred Chinese immigration altogether. At the local level, Vancouver focused on restoration, not reflection. Streets were cleared and storefronts repaired, but there was no public inquiry into police conduct, no official apology, and no serious reckoning on how rhetoric and organization had fueled the violence. The riot was treated as an episode to be contained, not a warning to be examined. For Chinese and Japanese residents, the message was unmistakable. Their belonging was fragile. Compensation could be offered, but rights remained constrained. The contrast in how the two communities were treated revealed a racial hierarchy shaped by political cost. Protection was extended where diplomacy demanded it, neglect where it did not. As headlines faded, the consequences endured. Businesses closed, families reconsidered their futures, and trust in authorities eroded. The riot was absorbed into Canada's political logic, used to justify further exclusion rather than prevent future violence. Though it ended in a single night, its effects stretched across decades, shaping policy, memory, and who was permitted to belong.
Yeah, and you've hit it right on the nose here, Mike. This is where the riot stops being treated as a failure and starts being treated as data, maybe, right? Mm-hmm. The violence isn't condemned as something that shouldn't have happened. It's reinterpreted as proof that the wrong people were here in the first place.
Yeah.
And that's a crucial shift. Instead of asking why a crowd attacked its neighbors, the state asks how to prevent those neighbors from existing in the future.
Well, that's the way to keep the peace. It's get rid of the people who are perceived as the problem or labeled that way.
Right, racism doesn't get corrected, it gets operationalized. And once you make that move, violence becomes useful. It supplies justification. It turns exclusion into management and prejudice into policy. And that's what's happened here. So the riot doesn't derail nation building. It actually accelerates it, oddly.
Yeah.
This is the part that still matters. The riot wasn't a failure of order. It was an expression of order. It didn't interpret the system. It clarified it. And again, Britishism was the standard and racism enforced it. This is all I see in this story. The riot didn't lead to a reckoning. It led to refinement. In the future, there are fewer broken windows, but there was more careful language, more polite exclusions, right? Which all ended up at the same outcome, just administered more sort of cleanly, if you will.
Yeah.
The violence lasted one night, but the logic behind it stayed for generations.
Yep. Modern Vancouver is often celebrated as one of Canada's and the world's most diverse cities, shaped by generations of migration from across the Pacific and beyond. Chinatown remains one of the oldest in North America, while the former Japantown around Powell Street is remembered today through memorials rather than busy storefronts. That diversity, now central to Vancouver's identity, stands in stark contrast to the exclusionary attitudes that dominated the city in 1907. That change is visible in civil life. Vancouver's current mayor, Ken Sim, is the first person of Chinese heritage to hold the office, a milestone in a city where Chinese residents were once denied the right to vote. While his administration focuses on present-day issues like public safety and housing, his election alone reflects how profoundly ideas of belonging have shifted over the past century. Asian Vancouverites have helped shape the city far beyond politics. Leaders like David Lam, British Columbia's first lieutenant governor of Chinese descent, alongside business owners, artists, educators, and community advocates, have played key roles in Vancouver's transformation into a global city. Japanese-Canadian families, many returning after wartime dispossession, rebuilt communities and preserved cultural memory through festivals, institutions, and advocacy. There are few visible traces of what happened on September 7, 1907. Towers rise where working-class neighborhoods once stood. and traffic flows where crowds once gathered. Yet Vancouver's present, its leadership, neighborhoods, and public culture has been shaped by the long struggle that followed that night, as exclusion was challenged, negotiated, and gradually reshaped by those who refused to be pushed aside. And that's it for Dark Poutine episode 401, Vancouver's 1907 Anti-Asian Riots.
That's right. It's time for voicemails. You can leave us a message at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you. Let's see who called us this week.
Alrighty, here is our first voicemail for our actual 2026.
Well, this is Marion from Queens again. You keep asking for calls, and I'm going through the back catalog, listening to some of the older shows. And I just finished the one about the professor who was killed in the 80s. And I was just thinking the guy was a chemist. But just because you have a degree doesn't mean you have mental health issues. And back in the 80s, who talked about mental health issues? And then the other episode, which was more troubling, was the twin brothers that set up the bank robbery to kill police officers. Now, how the mother didn't know that there was some psychological problem. They were going inward and inward and inward, not socializing. That's a red flag, and we're talking about 2022 when mental health issues were being discussed. And I also wonder how she didn't know all that ammunition was somewhere in the house or where the money was going. And I don't mean to victim blame, but there were so many red flags about mental health issues. Anyway, I still love your show. And by the way, we in New York do not have an accent. Love you guys. Bye.
Oh, thank you for calling, Marion, again.
Thanks, Marion. I love when Marion calls.
And we can hear the birds. I thought I heard a cat in there, too, at one point. So very interesting. But yeah, you know, she brings up a good point. We had two episodes where both should have, you know, people should have been like, something's not right here, and nothing happened. Nothing happened. It's like that's why I liked what I heard when I was in the UK. They had ads in the tube that would say, if you see something, say something. And then there was a guy every once in a while would come on. He'd say, see it, say it, sorted. So it was, you know, if you see it, you say it, and it gets sorted. So I don't know. Maybe we need to learn as a society to say, hey, something ain't right with these guys. Why do they have all these guns in their Instagram account? You know?
Yeah, I've run into this recently where somebody was telling me a story about how they see a major issue happening or somebody might get hurt. So they called this person's parents.
Yep.
To let them know that things are going sideways at the potential loss of friendship.
Yep.
But the need to try to keep somebody safe, which is a very hard thing to do. But when this person was telling me this, I said, listen, better you having a live friend that's not talking to you than a dead one, and that you worry what you could have done.
Yep. Well, I had to do that exact same thing. I have done that. I actually had to call the police when my friend was threatening to die by suicide.
Yeah.
And I did that, and he was so livid with me for some time. And
right.
But I don't care. He was still alive after that.
Yeah.
You know?
Plus, I also noticed a big difference between people's reactions to bags or luggage on the street and in public transport in Vancouver versus London.
Oh, of course. Yeah,
right?
because of what has happened in those places.
We've lived through. I've
Yeah.
lived through the bomb. I lived through the bombing, and when you see a bag that's left, you actually, maybe tourists don't, but local Londoners move the hell away from it and do tell somebody.
Yep.
Right? Because we've lived through it so many times.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating what is in your consciousness after an event.
Mm-hmm.
That's local to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, here's our next voicemail.
Hi, guys. My name's Jamie. I live in the middle of nowhere, BC. Have fun trying to figure out where, Matthew. I just wanted to say I am a longtime listener of your podcast. I love it. I actually got turned on to it from somebody sharing one of your episodes on Kevin Vermette and the Kitimat murders. I am from Kitimat. My children are Haisla, so that is their heritage. That is their homeland. Yeah. So.
Oh, I think she cut herself off, but that's okay. She was probably just going to tell us to go shit in our hats, but she wanted us to know that she was a fan of the show, and we appreciate that. So, Matthew, where do you think Jamie is from? So she says she is from Kitimat, but where else in BC now has she moved, and does she live?
Well, I think, she said the middle of nowhere.
Okay.
So, geographically, somewhere between Anaheim Lake and Tweedsmuir Provincial Park.
Okay. Okay. So she lives essentially in the middle of British Columbia. Like my friend Art, who, if you draw an X through British Columbia, he lives in Endako, which is very close to the center of the X near Fraser Lake.
Okay.
So she probably lives close to there, I would say. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right.
I mean, psychological nowhere would be probably somewhere in the southern interior plateau between Lillooet and Bridge River.
Psychologically, nowhere in BC is actually Langley. I live in nowhere.
You don't live in Langley, do you?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I have for 3 years. You've been here. So, yeah. What do you think Jamie does for a living, taking care of the kids there?
I think because she's in the middle of nowhere, she goes for very long walks.
Okay, that's what she does to live. Is she a hunter and a gatherer?
Yeah, she hunter-gatherers.
She hunter-gatherers.
Long walks.
Mm-hmm. That's a good idea. So there you go. Well, thank you, Jamie. And we're sorry your phone got cut off, but you know what? We know they were going to be words of love anyway, so we appreciate them.
We hope.
We hope. Yeah.
Hi, Mike and Matthew. It's Lacey from Calgary again. I finally, I'm always so behind on everything, but I finally watched the episode, I binged the season of Traitors Canada that you were on, Mike. So I thought you did pretty good. If the other people had been a little bit more with it, they would have known you knew what was up. But anyway, my burning question is, was the kitty there all the time? Could you play with the kitty? What was the cat's name? They did this whole big thing on the first episode, and the cat came out and sat on a pillow, and you saw him every once in a while, and that would be my big thing. I would be playing with the kitty and not talking to all of these people trying to figure out who the traitor was. But that is all. Anyway, take care. Love to everyone. Stay warm. All the best. Bye.
Well, thanks, Lacey. So yes, the cat was there for the very first episode when you saw it. We saw the cat with Corinne, who is the host of the Traitors party that we were having, the murder mystery. And so it was there first. I can't remember the cat's name. Someone who is one of my co-traders maybe will call and remind me who the cat was, but I can't remember right now because I was so traumatized by that whole situation. I would have loved to have played with the kitty, but I was sequestered in my room for most of the time that you don't see us on television. we're just sequestered. We can't talk to each other because they don't want us figuring out who's who off camera, So anyway, but yes, there was a cat there very briefly, and then I think it went back to its palace that it lived in because it was very regal. Anyway, Matthew, do you have anything to say about Traders? You loved the people who I was with.
What do you mean?
When you watched Traders, you had some very strong comments about some of the people I was on the show with.
Yeah. British Traders is so much better.
I am not saying that it isn't. Anyway, moving on. So I did a thing. I was on a TV show.
They should have listened to you. That's all I have to say.
Yep. Moving forward.
Hi, Mike and Matthew. I just wanted to call after listening to your Christmas episode. I wanted to say an excellent job, well done. For whatever reason this year, I don't know if it's just because it's the way 2025 went or the way December has been going, but I definitely don't feel the Christmas spirit. That story or tale, however you want to spin it, was very heartwarming as well as ominous. I can't wait to see if there is a second part this year or next, but it was very well done, and I appreciate the effort that you guys put into things. I bet you didn't think it'd bring tears to someone's eyes because it just gave my soul happiness listening to it. Anyways, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to Mike, Egg and Waffle, Justin and Steve. I hope your holiday season is filled with love, joy, and laughter. And I can't wait to see what the podcast. Thanks so much. From PEI, my job title was the backyard bonfire rave planner. Thanks so much. Bye.
Okay. So, yes, we had our PEI caller. I didn't catch your name because your phone cut out. And I know you were wishing Matthew, Justin, and Steve a Merry Christmas when your phone cut out at one point.
Because it was just Mike hit the cats, Justin, and Steve.
Yeah. Like, who's Matthew?
Screw you, Matthew.
Who are you? No, I am absolutely sure she was saying your name.
No, that's nice. I'm glad. A few people have commented on that special Christmas episode. Some people really liked it, which is great.
Yeah, and it was meant to be, a little bit of a break from the nonsense that's going on in the world today. And I'm really glad the responses that I've had personally for that episode are really quite nice.
That's great.
I'm very grateful that we were able to do that. I would like to do more fiction. Maybe we should do a dark poutine, like lighter fare dark poutine, and talk about things Canadian that are way more fun and lighter. Would you like that, Matthew, if we did that?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Why not?
Other people said to me that they weren't in the Christmas spirit. I think, Justin and I had a great Christmas because, it was a tough year. It was a tough year between
it definitely was
cancer and jobs and my father-in-law dying, just in November, which is leading up to Christmas. But, we decided to have a really nice Christmas. And then on New Year's Day, I played Ding Dong Lewitch is Dead by Klaus Nomi and danced to it and made Justin laugh because we were just, frankly, happy to see the end of 25, but going into 2026, feeling positive.
So Matthew just pointed out that we didn't talk about my travel woes. Oh, my goodness gracious. So for those who didn't follow along, and a lot of you did, and I am so grateful for the love that I got. I am blown away by the amount of love that I got online by, at first I started
and
complaining.
Physically with people looking after you.
People looked after me. There was all kinds of crazy things that happened. People put me up in a hotel. People took me, traveling around Nova Scotia. Gina Merlin and her family said, hey, you're bored. Let's take you out. So they took me to Hatfield Ranch, this farm in Nova Scotia, and we went on a hay ride.
Nice.
And we got to see kids acting like orangutans and crazy and doing their thing around it. It was really cold and windy. And after that, we thought, well, it's cold and windy inland, so let's go to Peggy's Cove and be cold and windy there. And we got to see like some amazing waves. And it blew my mind.
Who is Peggy?
I don't know who Peggy was. I haven't really looked into that. I should have. I mean, I grew up around there, but yeah. And then the next day I got to see my uncle. He took me out for lunch, and our good friend Jen Hesse put me up in a hotel using her points. Like, what? What did I ever do to deserve such care? And online, it was just like people pulling for me and saying, I hope you get home soon. I was there for 3 days that I wasn't meant to be. And honestly, I had so much fun. I had so much fun. And I made that crazy reel about airplane bumholes that, 25,000 people looked at. What? Yeah, I've had some rude comments because that's usually what happens when something goes, has a bit of legs on the internet. There was one guy, he's been an aircraft mechanic since 2025, so he's been a long time. Aircraft mechanic. And he said, tell me you don't know about airplanes without telling me you don't know about airplanes. And I wanted to say,
most of us are not mechanics. We just fly on them and we don't really care.
We don't really care. And I wanted to respond to him. So when were you born without a sense of humor, or did you have it surgically removed? Because honestly, I was just being funny. I was just trying to be funny.
Of course you were.
And
so Peggy's Cove in Nova Scotia is almost certainly named after St. Margaret's Bay, with Peggy functioning as a familiar anglicized nickname for Margaret.
Interesting.
There's another popular story that Peggy was a young woman who survived a shipwreck. But people think it's probably because it's like a shortened form of Margaret's Bay.
That St. Margaret's Bay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, very interesting. I did not know that, but yeah. If you ever get that way, go. You need to see Peggy's Cove Lighthouse at least once in your life. And then right down the street is the memorial to the Swiss Air 111 disaster that we covered here on Dark Poutine. So it is well worth a visit. And yeah, I am just so, like I say, so blown away by the literal thousands of people who responded to my plight of being stuck. So what happened? I was supposed to fly out on December 29th. Halifax Airport was shut down. We were the last plane that was scheduled to, we were the first ones in line next to go when the runways were shut down. So it was like I was almost in the air.
Well, but then, better to be the last one to be shut down than the first one to crash.
Exactly. Right? I am grateful that I was safe and sound. There was a time there where there was a period where I was worried I'm going to be sleeping in this airport until I don't know when, because they didn't tell you when you're flying out next. They can't tell you.
How long were you on after you got on the plane? How long were you on the? Oh, we're going quite long with this, but how long were you sitting on the plane before you deboarded?
I was sitting on the plane for almost 2 hours before we got off.
Have you beat Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. I know people have been there for.
I once sat in a plane on the tarmac in Detroit for 7.5 hours.
Yep. That's ridiculous. That should be. They came through they came through the cabin and gave us water if we wanted it, but I refused the water because I was like, all that's going to do is make me need to pee, and then I'm going to have to get up and walk through the cabin with all the other people who are farting and coughing and doing all the other things that people do on planes. So anyway, I finally got a flight booked. And I was booked by another airline called Air Canada. And then Air Canada decided to bump me again. So I was supposed to fly out on New Year's Eve. And Air Canada decided to bump me, and then so Porter had to, which was the original airline I was with, had to rebook me for January 1st. So I spent New Year's on my own, asleep in a hotel room because, I had to get up for 3 o'clock in the morning to be in a taxi by 4.
Gosh.
And then I got into the taxi and it was snowing again. And I was thinking, oh no, I'm not going to get home. So finally we get to Toronto, fly out of Halifax, get to Toronto. Guess what? Another delay.
Of course. They always knock on. The one thing I learned, as you know, I've traveled a lot, is I learned that old lesson of when you have no control over it.
100%.
The best thing to do is just have no expectations and go with the flow.
That's what I started. It took me a while to get there, but once that clicked in my head, it was like I had a great time. I started to do fun things, take lots of pictures, and I just had a great time instead of feeling sorry for myself. So anyway, let's move on.
That's it for this week's voicemails. Again, you can leave us one at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you, even if it is just to say hi and to tell us to go shit in our hats. If you're stumped for what to chat with us about, a quick story is welcome.
Alrighty, we do have a new patron this week, and her name is Christina Marie Palmer. And Christina Marie Palmer is from Edmonton, Alberta. Our neighbors there in Edmonton. Thank you, Christina, very, very much. Matthew, what do you think Christina Palmer does there in Edmondchuck, as I've heard it called?
I've never heard that before. Edmondchuck?
Actually, my ex-wife Carol used to call it Edmondchuck. So
Edmondchuck.
Yeah.
Well, Chuck. Oh, have you seen The Life of Chuck yet? By the way,
no, I have not.
It's fantastic.
Okay, I'll watch it.
Yeah, best. Somebody said it, but I agree. Best Stephen King film ever made.
Life of Chuck is Stephen King. Okay.
Yep.
Interesting.
I think she is a tennis coach.
Okay.
In Edmondchuck.
Interesting.
And the reason why I say that is there's so many indoor sports facilities in Edmonton that I assume half of the city is employed in sports facilities.
Okay. Well, there you go. Well, thank you so much, Christina, for...
Thanks, Christina. We appreciate it.
Taking care of people's fitness and for loving Dark Poutine. We really appreciate that. So first up, we have donut money donor from Duncan, British Columbia. And this person, Delilah, says, alas, the tariffs have me shutting down my dirty panty business. 99% of orders were old white Republicans. They are going to be some pissed. I don't expect that to be read out on the show, so I'll need a new job. Take a shit in your hat. Lots of love, Delilah. Well, guess what? I just did read it out on the show. But yeah, so poor Delilah has had to shut her panty. Oh, no. It's an actual thing.
So, do you want to hear a funny story?
What?
Somebody that I know talked to her grandmother about the foot fetish website.
Yep.
And the grandmother is now making about $800 a month posting photos of her feet.
Oh my gosh, Matthew, post pictures of your toe that you've stubbed.
Oh, gross. I stubbed my baby toe on the edge of the bed and the nail is black. I'm sure there's somebody who would like that.
There are people who would enjoy that. There's a fetish for...
I'm not shaming anyone, but
no.
Stubbed toenails aren't my thing.
No. So what? Well, obviously Delilah needs a new job. So yeah, let's give her a new job, Matthew, because she can't do that anymore.
Ministry of the Environment.
Okay, she's now the minister.
She's the minister.
Minister of the Environment for Canada. Well, thanks, Delilah, for doing such a great job.
She'd probably do a better job than whoever the current one is, but there you go.
She's minimizing waste.
Exactly.
Anyway.
It's hilarious.
It's all about recycling.
Reduce, reuse, recycle.
Yep, exactly. We do, oh boy, we do have another Donut Money donor, and this person's name is John Petrozelli. And John is from Wolfboro, New Hampshire.
Cool.
And he says, "Hi, Mike and Matt. I'm John Michael, and my fiance is Amber Brownlee. We know her. We've seen her before in the Lumberyard. We're recently engaged, and we listen to you nearly every morning. Thank you for entertaining us while our toddlers flail about to Ms. Rachel. Go crap in your cap. I'm from New Hampshire. She's from Ontario." Yes. Well, there you go.
What's the name of their town? Wolf?
It is Wolfboro. And
That's a cool name
it's
for
not
a town.
spelled like borough in the UK. It's Boro.
Oh, Wolfboro.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, exactly. So I'm wondering what on earth John and Amber do there in Wolfboro, New Hampshire.
They're wolf wranglers.
They're wolf wranglers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are they werewolves too? They could be.
No,
No,
they're not.
There's no such thing.
That's somewhere else in New Hampshire.
That's somewhere else in New Hampshire?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, fair enough.
And happy congratulations on your engagement.
Yes, much appreciated that you shared that news with us. We're so happy for you, and hopefully when you finally do tie the knot, things go super well, and people are very generous to you, and maybe you get to go somewhere cool or buy a house. I don't know.
You know, it's going to be my mine and Justin's 20th wedding anniversary this year
on July 1st.
And I'm thinking about getting everyone who's still alive who are at our wedding to meet up with us and go to the same restaurant again.
That sounds like fun. Alrighty, we are done with that. We do have some more patrons and Donut Money donors, but we're going to save those till next week. So there you go.
Thanks to all our patrons and Donut Money donors, past and present, for your generosity. It helps to keep the show going. You can become a patron of Dark Poutine at patreon.com/darkpoutine. For a one-time donation, you can send us donut money via PayPal or interact using our email address, darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com. If you don't already subscribe to the show, it would mean a lot if you did. You can easily find Dark Poutine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you haven't gotten yours yet, my 2 books are available to order via links on the Dark Poutine website or anywhere fine books are sold. And speaking of darkpoutine.com, check it out for show notes and other cool stuff. We'd appreciate it if you gave Dark Poutine a like or a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Most importantly, thank you for listening. Tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is a powerful thing.
And that's it for this episode of Dark Poutine. So until next time, don't forget to be a good egg and not a bad apple.
Bye, y'all.
Happy 2026.